Space is not an empty void. It is a labyrinth of ancient transit corridors that have guided galactic commerce for eons. Now, those corridors are shattering. In a region where physics has gone mad and 4 million years of stellar charts have turned to static, the galactic consensus sees only the end of the road. But humanity sees something else. Where the map ends, the human story begins. Welcome to Beyond Impossible. If this is your first time here, you have arrived at a channel dedicated to the one variable the universe cannot calculate. If you are a returning viewer, your presence is the fuel that sustains this work. We believe that humanity's refusal to accept the impossible is not a flaw, but our greatest weapon. Tonight, we follow Commander Yasha Orenfeld and her crew into a region of space where the laws of physics have surrendered, armed only with the audacity to map the unknown. The sensors are blind, but the human spirit is not. We move forward. The 17 systems didn't just vanish, they were unmade. Commander Yasha Orenfeld watched the holographic display of the Helios void ripple with data that contradicted itself every microsecond. 4 million years of galactic cartography, the collected navigational wisdom of the consensus, rendered obsolete in a single stellar rotation. The transit corridors, superluminal arteries that had sustained trillions of lives, were no longer roads. They were fractures. The anomaly wasn't just a storm. It was a fundamental rewrite of local spacetime, a region where the Chandrasekhar limit seemed to fluctuate and gravitational lensing occurred without mass. Beside her vessel, the Vanguard, the massive silhouettes of consensus dreadnoughts hung motionless. They were not preparing a rescue. They were calculating retreat. To the galactic elders, species who evolved in the safety of stable orbits and predictable physics, the void was a hard stop. Their logic engines had analyzed the probabilities. The variables were too chaotic, the geometry non-Euclidean. They were powering down their nav computers, accepting the loss of the 17 systems as a geological fact, like accepting that a star will die. They did not mourn the unreachable. They simply categorized them as lost. Yasha felt a different pull. Her expertise was not in reading stable charts, but in deciphering chaos, a skill honed in the asteroid belts of a death world where no two orbits were safe. Her flaw was the same as her strength, a refusal to look away from the abyss. While others saw a wall, she felt the itch of a challenge, a stubborn twitch in her mind that refused to accept the finality of zero probability. Her parents had been surveyors of the outer rim. She had been raised on the credo that a blank spot on a map is a promise, not a threat. "Commander, the flux is intensifying," Lieutenant Kale said, his voice tight. The sensor array was screaming, returning images of stars that weren't there and voids where planets should be. "The consensus is broadcasting a do not enter mandate. They say the region is effectively non-existent." "Non-existent to their instruments," Yasha murmured, her eyes locked on the swirling interference. "Not to us." The stakes were measured in heartbeats. Inside the disrupted corridors, hundreds of billions of refugees were trapped in relativistic limbo. For every hour the Vanguard delayed, weeks passed for those trapped in the dilation pockets. They were aging, starving, fading into the background radiation of a universe that had forgotten them. The consensus mourned them as already dead. Yasha saw them as merely waiting. She initiated the startup sequence. The engines groaned, a deep vibration felt through the deck plates more than heard. "We are not here to verify the map," she said, her hand hovering over the engagement throttle. "We are here to draw a new one." The Vanguard pivoted, turning its bow toward the static, and Yasha pushed them forward into the impossible. The silence of the void was a lie. Inside the anomaly, reality screamed in frequencies that rattled the teeth. The Vanguard plunged into the distortion, and immediately the universe stopped making sense. Visual input lagged behind instrument readings by agonizing seconds. The ship was flying through a soup of quantum decoherence where cause and effect had divorced. Yasha gritted her teeth, gripping the manual override stick until her knuckles whitened. "Ignore the primary display," she ordered, her voice cutting through the shuddering deck. "Fly by the gravimetric wake, feel the currents." This was human navigation, archaic, instinctive, a defiance of pure algorithm. For 3 precious minutes, it worked. The Vanguard slipped through a sheer zone that would have torn a consensus ship apart, riding a hunch that a gravitational eddy would lead to a pocket of stability. It was a triumph of irrational hope, believing a path existed where logic dictated none could. They charted a course through the invisible, trusting their gut over the screaming sensors. Then the universe corrected their arrogance. The pocket collapsed without warning, a sudden implosion of space-time geometry. A rogue wave of dark energy topology slammed into the starboard hull. The ship screamed, hull plating groaning under stresses it was never designed to endure, the sound like a dying beast. Alarms blared, a cacophony of failure. "Navarre is offline," Kale shouted, clutching a rail as the deck pitched violently, sparks showering from an overloaded conduit. "We're flying blind." The cost of their hope was immediate and brutal. They had gambled on a pattern that didn't hold, and now they were trapped deeper in the void with no eyes. Outside the viewports, the stars stretched into infinite lines, then snapped back into points, a strobe light of cosmic violence. The ship's spin threatened to tear them apart, centrifugal force pinning them to the bulkheads. On the edge of the anomaly, the consensus observers processed the humans' trajectory with cold confusion. To their hive minds, the human behavior was a statistical error, a glitch in the galactic record. They entered the chaos. They did not dissolve. They persist. It was not admiration they felt, but a disturbed curiosity. Why continue when the probability of survival had dropped to fractional margins? To the consensus, this was suicide, not exploration. Inside the Vanguard, the situation worsened. The anomaly wasn't static. It was learning, or perhaps merely reacting. The route they had used to enter was gone, erased from space-time. They weren't just lost. They were being written out of existence. "We can't map this," Kale said, his voice cracking, the crushing weight of the impossible pressing down on him. "It changes before we can record it." Yasha wiped blood from a cut on her forehead, staring into the swirling static. The failure of the instruments wasn't the end, it was the condition of the test. "We don't need to record it," she said, her voice hardening. "We need to be the pen." The problem had shifted. They were no longer explorers. They were the only stable reference points in a dissolving world. The static inside the bridge was absolute, a white noise roar of failing sensors, but Yasha moved through it with a terrifying calm. She ignored the chaos on the screens. "Turn off the compensation algorithms," she ordered, her voice steady amidst the shudder of the dying ship. "Kill the stabilizers. Give me manual control of the thrusters." Kale stared at her as if she had lost her mind. Disabling the only systems keeping them from being paced on the bulkheads was suicide. The consensus, watching from the edge with their precise, passive instruments, it was a confirmation of insanity. The humans were stripping away their safety nets to fly by raw biological feel. The Vanguard became an extension of Yasha's nervous system. She didn't navigate by where the gravity wells were. She navigated by the ghost of where they should have been. It was a cartography of memory and intuition, a refusal to accept that the universe had changed the rules without consulting them. He saw the patterns in the noise, the shadows of the old transit corridors that still lingered in the subspace topology. "There," she whispered, pointing to a void on the screen that read as solid matter. "The current is weak there. It remembers the old path." They shot forward, threading a needle between two colliding time dilation fronts. The hull shrieked, the temperature inside the bridge spiking as they grazed the event horizon of a phantom singularity. For a moment the impossible happened, the sensors cleared, a path opened, they had found a seam in the madness. "I have a fix," Kale shouted, relief flooding his voice. "The refugees, I'm reading their beacons. They're clustered around the Lagrange point," but the victory was sand in their mouths. As they approached the coordinates, the reality of the trap became clear. The refugees weren't waiting in a safe harbor. They were frozen in a stasis field, trapped in a loop of recursive time. The corridor didn't lead out. It led down, a gravity well so steep that light itself was struggling to climb out. The safe zone was a tomb. The anomaly had baited them. The path Yasha had trusted, the ghost she had followed, had led them into a cage. The exit was already sealing behind them, space-time knitting shut like healing skin. On the bridge of the Consensus flagship, the observers felt a ripple of something they rarely experienced: dread. The humans had survived the approach, defying probability, only to arrive at a dead end. The calculation was final. Entropy, 100%. Escape vector, null. Yet looking at the telemetry, the Admiral saw something that chilled its fluid core. The human ship was not powering down, it was spinning up its engines. They weren't trying to leave. They were preparing to go deeper. The trap was perfect, a gravitational coffin ceiling shut with the inevitability of a tombstone. Kale slumped in his chair, the fight draining out of him. "It's over," he whispered, staring at the readouts that displayed nothing but failure. "There is no way out. The Consensus was right." He was looking at the data, the hard, cold math that said survival was impossible. He was looking at the end. Yasha looked at the same data and saw something else entirely. She saw a blank page. "The Consensus maps what is," she said, her voice ringing with a clarity that cut through the despair. "They record the past, but we are humans. We map what will be." Her hand flew across the console, not plotting an escape from the gravity well, but plotting a course directly into the singularity at its heart. It was insanity. It was suicide. It was the only logical move in a universe that had abandoned logic. "The anomaly is a vacuum of information," she explained rapidly, her eyes burning with a terrifying, irrational certainty. "It's collapsing because it has no reference points. It doesn't know where to go, so we're going to tell it." She wasn't trying to find an exit, she was creating one. She began manually inputting coordinates, extrapolations, guesses, desperate hopes masquerading as navigational fixes. She was feeding the void a lie so audacious it might just become the truth. "There is a path here. I dare you to prove me wrong." On the Consensus flagship, the Admiral recoiled from the telemetry. The human ship was charging its drive toward the crushing center of the distortion. "They are attempting to impose topology on a null space," the Admiral clicked, its alien mind struggling to parse the heresy. "They are. Lying to the geometry." To a species that worshipped observed data, this was blasphemy, but to the humans it was simply survival. "Kale, broadcast our projected course on all frequencies," Yasha ordered. "Make the map loud. Make it undeniable." She was betting everything on the single human trait the galaxy had never accounted for: the ability to believe in a destination that didn't exist yet. The Vanguard shuddered, its engines screaming as they pushed against the crushing weight of improbability. "Hold on," she whispered. "We're writing the road as we drive it." The ship lunged forward, not into the dark, but into the light of their own impossible conviction. The Vanguard slammed into the theoretical center of Yasha's lie, and the universe bit back. The hull temperature spiked past critical limits, metal groaning as the path Yasha had invented refused to solidify. The ship was tearing itself apart, trying to occupy a space that didn't exist yet. This was the cost of irrational hope. It demanded a sacrifice of sanity and safety. Yasha's hands bled on the controls, her mind straining to hold the image of the route in her head, forcing reality to bend to her will. The lie was heavy. It weighed tons in the crushing gravity well. "We're losing structural integrity across all decks," Kale shouted over the roar of failing bulkheads. The ship was vibrating at a frequency that was liquefying the insulation. "The map! It's too thin. The vacuum is rejecting it." He looked at her, eyes wide with terror, begging for a return to the rational world where they simply accepted death. But retreat was a mathematical impossibility now. The gravity well had them in its teeth. Stop was to die, to hesitate was to die. Only velocity could save them. On the edge of the void, the Consensus Admiral felt a spasm of theoretical horror. The human ship wasn't just navigating the anomaly, it was infecting it. The broadcast of the false map was forcing local spacetime to acknowledge a new geometry, overwriting the chaos with a narrative of order. It was a navigational virus, a lie so bold that physics itself was pausing to verify it. The refugees, dormant and dying in their transit pods, began to flicker on the sensors as their primitive nav computers locked onto the human signal. The strain mounted inside the bridge. A conduit exploded behind Yasha, showering the deck with sparks and shrapnel. The road she was writing was trying to erase them. She could feel the singularity pulling at her very atoms. "Increase power," she screamed, her voice cracking, raw with the effort of holding the fiction together. "Make the lie louder." She was betting her life, her crew, and the billions watching on the belief that the universe was not rigid but negotiable. The ship hit the event horizon of the phantom singularity. Time dilated, stretching seconds into eternities of crushing pain. The gravity was a physical weight on her chest, crushing the air from her lungs. This was the crucible, the moment where the human spirit is forged or broken. Yasha didn't close her eyes. She stared into the face of non-existence and refused to blink. "I am the map," she gritted out through bloodied teeth. The vanguard screamed, tearing through the final barrier between the impossible and the inevitable. The fabric of space-time tore, not with a whimper, but with the roar of a newborn star. Yasha's projection solidified into reality, the light calcifying into hard physics as the vanguard burst through the far side of the anomaly. The singularity, starved of the chaos it fed on, collapsed into a harmless point of light behind them. The path held. It was ragged, it was jagged, and it defied every law of the consensus, but it was there, a bridge of pure, audacious will stretching across the void. The refugee fleet, dormant for what seemed like centuries in the dilation pockets, flickered to life. Their nav computers, seized by the human signal, locked onto the new coordinates. Thousands of ships, from massive freighters to personal skiffs, engaged their drives. They didn't ask if the road was real. They trusted the hand that had reached into the dark. They followed the vanguard through the wound in space, a river of salvation flowing along a chart drawn in human blood and hope. On the bridge of the consensus flagship, the Admiral watched the impossibility unfold. The probability algorithms crashed, unable to process the data. They were witnessing a miracle of uncalculated origin. The humans had not discovered a path. They had demanded one into existence. The geometry of the sector was rewriting itself in real time, conforming to the human map. The galaxy's definition of impossible had just been edited by a species that refused to read the fine print. The vanguard emerged into clear space, the 17 systems shining bright before them. They had done the unthinkable. They had looked into the face of a hostile cosmos and said, "Move." And the cosmos had moved. The aftershocks of the event rippled through the galactic record. The region formerly known as the Helios Void was redesignated on every consensus star chart with a single new symbol, the human path. For a species that had walked the stars for eons, the ancient powers were forced to admit that they had forgotten the simplest truth of navigation, that a map is not just a record of the past, but a promise for the future. Yasha stood on the observation deck, watching the refugee ships disperse into the safety of known space. The consensus hailed them, not with a reprimand, but with a frequency reserved for the highest honors. They didn't understand what she had done, not really. They saw a new navigational trick. They didn't see the terror, the bleeding gums, the sheer, unyielding refusal to accept the end. But the galaxy would remember. It would remember that when the map ended, humanity began. And in the vast, dark library of the universe, a new volume was opened, one written not in ink, but in the daring of those who venture beyond the edge of the page. Humanity's defining characteristic is not the ability to see what is, but the audacity to see what could be. Commander Yasha Orenfeld and her crew proved that the universe is not a static cage, but a canvas waiting for those brave enough to paint new laws upon it. They paid for the Helios Void with blood and sanity, carving a path through impossibility with nothing but a lie made truth. The galaxy watched a map appear where none existed, and learned that the only true barrier in the cosmos is the limit of one's own belief. We do not find the way, we make it. Thank you deeply for spending your time here with us at Beyond Impossible. Your likes, comments, and shares are the very fuel that keeps this channel alive and exploring the unknown. If this story of defiance resonated with you, please smash that like button. It ensures this message reaches those who need to hear it most. And if you haven't yet, hit subscribe. Don't miss the next time the galaxy says impossible and humanity says watch us. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that no map is ever truly finished. Until next time, keep conquering the unthinkable.